Well, throughout this series, we've been looking at different aspects of purity as it translates to our awareness, to our attitude, to our vision, to our thoughts, to so many different components, which you could say in a way is slightly philosophical. Whereas today we're beginning to really take the subject of purity and bring it into our everyday lives, because it's in our lives that all these ideas take root and have meaning. And there may be some people joining our session today who really don't have a handle at this point in what we mean by purity in food and lifestyle, and why that should be a desirable thing to work towards. Can you give us, first of all, a broad brushstroke understanding of purity in food and lifestyle and what that means to you?
I think you'd have to separate food and lifestyle a little bit. But basically, the world around us has three sorts of qualities: highest, middling, and lowest, right? Mm-hmm. And that translates into high, elevated feelings and thoughts, mediocre feelings and thoughts, and low level, sort of not very elevated thoughts, like, sort of that's keep us stuck in the mud in a way. So what we eat and the way we engage with the world, it has to be at a higher level if we want to have a higher level of consciousness. And engaging in the world at its highest level and, taking in, consuming the highest quality type of foods, for me, that's what purity is all about. How do I engage in the world in such a way that it doesn't contaminate me with all of the stuff that's going on, and that doesn't contaminate my body, that leaves that you can't really get anything 100% pure, even though it's funny, isn't it, how people appreciate purity, because you see it written on every box of cereal or every fruit juice, 100% pure, right? Mm-hmm. If they put 85% pure, no one would buy it, So we have this expectation that things should be the best. But what about our inner self? What about the food for our mind? What about what we're feeding ourselves in the way we think and engage with people and things? So that's also part of it. And it's actually, they're two sides of the same thing, because traditionally food has always been considered to have a spiritual component, if you look at the different ancient traditions. But definitely the way we engage with other people, what we say to them, how we say it, and what we see in people could be higher, middling, or lowest. So that's probably the way I would definitely define it.
So this is the the understanding of the three gunas.
That's
the
right.
Three qualities of sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. Right. And foods are divided into these different categories. And I'd like to, sorry, go on.
No, sorry.
I'd like to come on and talk about food specifically in a moment, but before we get sort of into the detail, I just want to kind of pursue for a little longer this understanding as it sits within the Brahma Kumaris as to why this is so important for us. Because what I'm understanding here is that our goal in Raja Yoga meditation is to have the highest possible love affair with the divine source as is possible. And in order to do that, we need to go through this purification process, not just of mind and body, but thoughts on every level, so that we have a capacity to touch into the mind of God, the qualities, the vibration of God, and that this is our goal. This is what we thirst for more than anything else, and this is why we pursue the idea of purity in these things in the way that we do. Do you want to say anything more about this kind of hidden goal, if you like?
it is one of the pillars of our spiritual development. And of course, people are welcome to test out the idea. But you see, for us who are, dedicated students and teachers of Brahma Kumaris, we practice celibacy. That's it. I mean, I remember I was with, I'm not going to mention the name of the group, a very big spiritual group. And I was talking to the world secretary of the organization. And I know that they practice also Raj Yoga, but the sort of Raj Yoga of Patanjali,
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them, do your, highest instructors, do they practice celibacy? And she said, yes, we do. And how many are they? She said about 200. In a huge organization, much bigger than ours. And then she asked me, how many practitioners of celibacy do you have in Brahma Kumaris? I said, over 1 million. She said, what do you mean? Every dedicated student, every dedicated teacher of Brahma Kumaris practices celibacy. And it's, people, when they hear that, they say, what? It's so out of context in the world that we live in. But really, it's a question of how I want to use my energy. Do I want to be dominated by the sense organs? Do I want to be dominated especially by lust? Or do I want to have higher feelings and higher expectations of myself? And I have found, because, through my own experience, that when I'm able to keep my vision high, I'm able to keep my energy high. So when I see someone, instead of seeing their body, instead of seeing the skin and being pulled or pushed by someone's beauty or ugliness, I can see behind that and I can see the soul. But if I'm just looking at their sort of bodily form and their shape and, and all of the different curves and turnings, you could say, then I lose it. I don't see that person as a spiritual being. I see them as a body, and it may excite my own body. And so I'm being quite frank here. I found that if I engage with people at a higher level, that becomes unimportant. And spiritual love is probably the highest of all ideals. Love at a very low, let's say, tamastic level, would be involving attachment and lust. But at its highest level, it's absolutely pure, that I can see the spiritual being. It doesn't matter if the person in front of me is a man or a woman or an old person or a young person. It doesn't matter how beautiful they are. It doesn't matter what race they're from. I can see behind all of the skin, all of the external appearances and all of the makeup even. I'm out of the game of, going after beauty physically. My interest is spiritual beauty. And I mean, the only thing that I can say to people is to try it. Try to start to see people differently from the context of their physical body. And you find it's very freeing. You become extremely free. You become extremely light. And your thoughts are staying at a very high level. You think less, much less, and you think much better. And therefore you feel greater. That's all I can say. Frankly.
I mean, people, I think, are used to a celibate priesthood within Christianity, within Buddhism, within many of the world's traditions. So there has always been a reverence for celibacy and a sort of an idealized state of celibacy, but also a realism that for most people it's not attainable. And yet, as you're saying, within Brahma Kumaris, it's something that people are able to adopt because they make a strong connection with the reasons why that is so important. And as you're suggesting, love is also coming in these three qualities of pure, middling, and impure. And when you get tangled up in someone's physicality, you're coming under their influence, you're coming under their control, and maybe you're happy all the while things are going well, but then things fall apart and you become unhappy. And yet, as a yogi, what we're aiming for is a life where we are beyond the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the good and the bad, and we're just cruising at a nice, constant speed. And so celibacy becomes a way of freeing yourself from a whole raft of complications. Now, you've been in South America for over 40 years. It's a very strongly passionate culture. How do you find people respond when you tell them this aspect of our lifestyle choice and practice?
Actually, it's just an invitation to start with, because mostly, let me be quite honest, and this has probably happened in most places. I was with a group of, say, 50 people over 40. And I asked them, what about, different social contexts and so on. It was only about 50. But I asked them how many of them had children, most of them. How many of you are with the person with whom you created those children? 5%. They'd all separated, they'd all divorced. If we can learn to love people not without having to use the coinage of sex, right? Then we are, as you said, we are freer. We are freer. And I just invite people to experiment with it, even from an energetic perspective, right? If you look at the language of chakras, right? We have, 7 chakras right throughout the body. And one here, one here, one here, one here, and as you go down, and our energy goes up and down, right? And most people live in the chakras below the belt. It's using that language, even the chakras of the belly. So they're interested in food and they're interested in sex, right? Or it's been a huge deal even until they're, quite late in life. And of course, psychologists would think that what we're saying is completely ridiculous, because everyone is bought into the idea that it's absolutely essential. But it's not, you can live without that sort of coinage. And when you start to operate from this level, even from this level, like what you say is elevating and elevated, what you see is elevated and elevating, what you think, these 3 here, you start to have much more freedom in your relationships. No one starts to pull and push you. You don't have, you tend not to have, you have love, but not attachment. You have love, but there's no bondage in it. There's no obligation. If I love you, you have to love me back, right? If I pat you on the back, you have to pat me on the back, right? It's emotional commercialism, you could say, that most relationships revolve around. But when people start to experiment, that's why I said it's just an invitation, experiment with it, try it. And you have to also add the ingredient that this is quite impossible to do if we don't have a source of spiritual power to do it with. So where does God exist? God doesn't exist on that level of exchange between bodies. Does not exist at that level. So as a soul, I have to be a little bit beyond that sort of exchange in order to have a spiritual exchange at a very high and elevated level. The relationship between the soul and God does not pass through the body. So if I can go beyond my own body, because I'm a soul, I'm not the body, I have a body. So if I want to be free from the dominance of my own sense organs, it's interesting to make a commitment to try to see things at a higher level. Try it out, that's what I say. And many have tried it out, and many have said, yes, it's better than the way I was living before. But we're only able to do that if we have God's help. I would say the power that comes from the connection with God.
Which comes back to my point that the what you get out of it is so exquisite, because it's our relationship with the divine, which is actually the most precious thing to any soul. And it's the separation from God, the separation from the divine that causes so much pain, that we then look for these other relationships to fill that gap and give us a weakened down version of it. But if you can experience the real deal, the real beauty of a relationship with that soul, then it becomes so much easier. I'm wondering, this must be a process that you go through. It's not something that happens overnight. Because we have in the Brahma Kumaris this idea that it's not just a sort of celibacy on the physical level, but even in your mind as well, your thoughts, so that you reach a point, even in your dreams, where you're not having thoughts of physical lust. And I wonder how long in your experience it took to get to that point where it simply doesn't exist in your auric field at all. How long would you say that took?
I don't know if it's a question of time, because it oscillates, and I see that it's connected with something else. And if we go back to that idea of, being dominated by different levels of energy within the body, like the lower levels below the belt levels and above the chin levels, it's absolutely essential that you engage in serving others, because the energetic opposite of wanting to serve your body through sense stimulation and wanting to serve others spiritually, they are complete energetic opposites. So I find that when I'm engaged in serving others, what does that mean? It means I'm producing a sort of energy that's uplifting for others. I'm saying words that help them to grow spiritually. I'm providing some sort of even vibration that can elevate people. I'm creating an atmosphere in which people can respond positively and grow. When I'm engaged very consciously on that, I don't even think about these things. It's impossible. And even, weeks and weeks and weeks. And let's say, just as gravity's there, right? The gravity pulls objects to the ground, right? If I'm not consciously engaged in serving and being useful, and then the senses start to pull me back gradually again. So I notice that it's, I'm not perfect in all of this, but I can understand the mechanisms. I can understand the traps. And, if I'm engaged just helping people and I'm connected with God, I can stay flowing along like that for months. But if I'm in some sort of, let's say, I'm prevented from doing that for any reason, the gravity's there still. It's not that, to keep something flying in the air, it has to have power, right? If you've got an object flying and it doesn't have any propulsion, what happens to it? Comes back down again. So I can notice the oscillations. If I were perfectly stable, I probably wouldn't be here, right? I'd already be an angel. But to keep that perfect stability, and of course, it's lots of subtle things, because Gandhi, I know, and this is probably the connection with food, maybe we can make the bridge here. Gandhi, why I started to practice this sort of thing, even practice meditation, because I read his autobiography, which is called Experiments with Truth, in which he was treating his own body as a laboratory and his own life as a laboratory. I said, that's interesting. Let me experiment with these things. And he tells in that book very clearly about his experiments with celibacy. Of course, it wasn't easy for his wife, but he was very determined, very committed to the idea. And he said, what happens often is when you start to sublimate lust, the next thing that comes up is greed. So lust, actually, the word comes from the same word as luxury in Latin. So you start to have good things, you have to start to have tasty things, you start to sort of, instead of filling your sex organs with excitement, you start to fill your stomach with appetizing things. And so we also have to be careful of that, because you can have lust for bodies, but you can also have lust for food, or lust for anything, actually. You're running after it, you're being enticed by it, it's pulling you along. You know, you just sink into some sensorial experience because it's attractive, and you've forgotten your real self by doing that. So there's a connection, sure, between lust and greed.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. And as you say, you know, food and sex, you know, they're often used by advertising industry very closely. And I think, you know, they're two things which in our world have become really quite distorted and degraded. And by trying to live a pure life with this food and this lifestyle, we are in a way changing the blueprint of how humanity can operate. We're purifying relationships. We're purifying our relationship with food as well. And, you know, like we've been saying in our relationships with others, food is another thing that we take into our physical body. It has a physicality to it. And, you know, where that food has come from, how it's been prepared, the consciousness with which it's been prepared, all of these things have an influence on our mind ultimately when we take it in to our body. Can you say something about the importance, therefore, of bringing purity into what we eat?
Oh, definitely. You know, as you were talking about how it comes into the advertising, there are such, I mean, if you know the tricks, you can see these hidden persuaders. If you ever notice, think about it. If you ever see a fast food joint, a fast food place, practically always the signs are yellow and red. Any of these famous fast food joints, you know, I'm not going to mention names, I suppose so.
I think we all know who you're referring to.
Everyone knows. But any of the main ones, you see it's always yellow and red, because they figured out that yellow and red stimulates the taste buds, and so you're more likely to stop. And it's always fast food stuff, right? And I guess fast food is poisoning the planet, definitely. You know, quick snacks, at least the sacrality of preparing and eating food is completely forgotten. So it starts with growing the food, right? The best sort of food would be homegrown, I imagine. And so why? Because when you eat something, and this is, I can talk a little bit technically about this because my background is in food chemistry. So I worked in research and development in the food industry. So I know what they put in the food to stimulate your taste buds, even all of the poisons. You know, since 1940s, there have been thousands of additives created to keep the food more tasty, to keep the food more artificially fresh, to keep the food more sort of exciting, appetizing, fulfilling. You know, they put a bit of methylcellulose as a filler, and you think, oh, this is great. I had this. It really satisfied my hunger, you know. So it's all about the taste buds, the monosodium glutamate, the MSG, and, you know, oh, that's great. Let me eat more of that. Let me eat more of it. And you see in the ads, eat me, eat me, eat me, right? Or feel me, feel me, feel me. That's how they work it out. And I remember I was a little bit disgusted because, you know, this company I work for, they produce yogurt, right? and with fruits, right? And on the pack, there's some beautiful strawberries, like they've been freshly picked and photographed, and the dew is just dripping off the strawberry. It looks so beautiful, but in the yogurt, there's just strawberry sludge. It's what they couldn't sell. It's just like a paste that they buy, and they mix it in. And so I was disgusted. I couldn't. I said to my boss, "Why do you do this?" He said, "Well, it's to sell. You know, otherwise, if they showed the real photos, no one would buy it. If you went to any industry, if you went inside an abattoir, if you went inside a place where they produce milk, you'd probably be so disgusted that you'd never eat or drink it again." So there is a world, it's like a conspiracy for us to eat things that will stimulate just the senses, but nothing to do with stimulating our spirituality. So when we engage in food, the preparation of the food, the growing, of course, if you can do it, then the preparation requires a higher level of consciousness, the vibrations. And then, of course, we're eating food because we have the luck that God has given us to live nicely. And so there should be some sort of thanks to the divine. And then we eat it in that sort of remembrance. That's the highest level of food in terms of vibration, but there's also the highest level of food in terms of quality, right? So what's the highest level? Flowers and fruits, then leaves, then stalks, and then roots, right? Freshly prepared. Then going down, then you get sort of animal products maybe. Where some people are lacto-vegetarians, but that's not as high as flowers and fruits, right? But of course, middling level food, rajasic food, would be industrialized vegetables and stuff, you know. These products that I just mentioned, you know, strawberry yogurt sludge, right? Mm-hmm. Then you've got the lower category types of foods, the foods that really stimulate you, like onions and garlic, and then you've got all of the meats, fish, chicken, beef, pork, all of those things. They're dead foods. So dead, Raja means dead. Raja means lethargy. Raja means stopped. Tama, I'm talking about Tama. Tamasic means that, dead, dense, stopped. Raja means active, stimulated, a lot of thinking, a lot of running around. And Sattva means lightness, easiness, freedom. So which type of food would you like to eat? Those ones that keep you light and happy and easy, don't take much to digest, or the ones that really stimulate you and you start thinking too much and doing too much, or the ones that just tie you down into sort of a dense lethargy? Which one would you prefer?
It's interesting. It's almost a similar process of experimenting and exploring celibacy, which is detaching from that pull of the physical body, and with a pure diet, it's about detaching from those foods that are going to pull us down as well, that are going to sort of whisper in our ear that they want us to eat them. It's going to become a distraction, possibly even an addiction. And that can be like a subtle process that keeps going. So some people may have done all the sort of the gross tamasic foods, but they maybe still have a sugar addiction, or they're still, you know, wanting to eat too much chocolate, or, you know, whatever it is. And that can still be a way of your mind being pulled by food. And yet really our goal is to get to a place where there's no one particular food that we are lusting after or craving or desiring or saying that we must have. Yeah. It's just pure food. And I also want to just touch on as well the karma involved in how that food has been delivered to your plate. And you mentioned about growing your own as being the purest form. And I think that's a really important point, because so often food has been grown with exploitation or has involved the suffering of animals. And in some way that energy is coming through into the food and you're ingesting that energy when you eat it.
Yeah, can I tell you an experience that I had when I was working in R&D in the food industry? I stopped eating meat because of chemical reasons, and I tell you why. I didn't have any sort of moral perspective at that time, or a spiritual perspective. And once, because we were doing some work, it was a big food concern. It was actually one of the biggest ones in the world. I'm not going to mention the name, but they had all sorts of interests, right? In the restaurant industry and the hospital food industry, all of that. So I had to do a study of the meat industry, right? So one of the things I did, and this is like, I'm not going to tell all of the things I did and saw, like a Frankfurt sausage is just everything that's left over and just ground up and mixed with some flavors and some spices. Who would eat eyes of a cow, or the testicles, or the ears? All of that stuff is in the Frankfurter sausage. Oh my God! But I just took some fresh meat, and I wanted to see what it was like experimenting. Right? What's in this? What's in this piece of fresh meat? What are the substances that are there? So I put it in a liquefier, and then I analyzed the juice that came out of that. And I found lipids, like they are the fats. I found proteins, different proteins. I found blood, of course. But I also found all of the different ingredients that you'd expect to find in the urine. Because what happened when the cow died, or the animal died, the heart stopped and the kidneys stopped functioning. So all of the blood that would have gone to the kidneys to get processed stopped. And it's there, right? So you'll find the same thing like urea, formaldehyde, ammonia. You'd find also uric acid, all of those things. And when I started to go out with friends and they would say, this is a lovely juicy steak, and I'm imagining a cup of urine, because that's what the juice is, right? The saltiness and so on. If you've ever eaten meat, and I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it, because the taste is actually what would have been urinated if the animal had lived. So I stopped. I said, I can't eat this thing. I started to see the meat as a cup of urine. I'm sorry to use this language, folks, but that's real,
I mean, it's a process that so many people are going through now, not necessarily for purity reasons, but for ecological environment reasons, looking at the impact of some of these foods and how they're grown. And, we're not going to go into all of that today, but, the reasons for eating a simpler diet are so convincing. I think you have really finally put the nail in the coffin for anyone that might be possibly still considering ever eating meat ever again.
It's not just that, Philip, from that like food chemistry perspective.
Yeah.
Our bodies need amino acids. And there's this whole idea that we need protein. How many times when you were growing up, you heard someone say, you need more protein, so drink milk, eat meat. But we need amino acids, and amino acids, it's like building blocks. So our body produces, say, 14 of them, but we need 22. So we've got to get the other 8 from somewhere else. Where do cows get their amino acids from? Grass. Where do whales get their, the hugest animals in the world get their amino acids from leaves and grass and plankton. So if I understand that, and we're indoctrinated since little that we need protein. It's a fallacy. It's a myth. We need amino acids, and we can get them straight from the vegetables, like every big animal does.
Absolutely. We're coming up to a time of year, really, when many people are going to be feasting and indulging and buying stuff that they don't necessarily need. And I wonder if we could just move on to looking at purity in lifestyle when it comes to not acquiring more than we need, to really going through life with the simplicity that means we only consume, we only buy that which we really need. And we don't just use once, throw away and buy again, but we really preserve what we have. We cherish it and we use it well, because our society has become so throwaway, and we so, each season people throw out their clothes, buy new clothes. It's become an unsustainable way for the planet to continue. And yet the yogi life really teaches us that we just don't need any of this stuff.
We need just what we need. We need something to clothe our
जो
body.
है उसको हम बचा के रखें.
We need to put some things on our feet. We need to wear something, but we don't need 50 pairs of shoes or 10 coats. We need the basic things. And when we become yogis, then our tendencies, it seems like such an anathema to waste. We don't waste because, there's a huge campaign about recycling and all of that stuff. I would say we shouldn't buy things in the first place that you need to recycle later. We should have simple tastes, not poor tastes, I would say. We're not poverty stricken, but at the same time, we don't need luxury at all. We don't need $100,000 car if we're just going to use it to go to the supermarket, to show our friends maybe. We just need a car that gets us from here to there, and maybe the one that consumes less petrol. There's a whole lot of things that we could do if we had a simpler approach to living. And if I'm simple in my thinking, I will be simple in my tastes.
And there's a real joy in that, in consuming less. It brings its own real pleasure, actually. And like we were saying earlier, all of these lifestyle changes happen because we have a power that we can tap into that gives us the energy, that keeps us focused and gives us the ability to do these things. And in a way that's coming around full cycle where we started with that relationship with God. And I had a question for you before we came on, which was that you have a very special place in my heart, and I think in the hearts of many of us in the Brahma Kumaris, especially those of us that have been around since the early days. And that is because you wrote some very exquisite, beautiful songs, which you sang equally beautifully. One in particular I'm thinking about, which begins like moths circling around the flame, because for me that song really takes you into the pure experience of God's love, which is the driver, which is the motivator, which is the power that enables us to make all of these changes in our life. Can you just share something about what you were feeling when you wrote that song, and what it is that you experienced that made you convey that feeling?
Well, I think, first of all, the whole idea of meditation, according to Raj Yoga and Brahma Kumaris, is to reduce our consciousness to a point. Now, I'm one point. God is just another point. So it's 2 points in the line in between. Now, if I can keep that, if I can have my consciousness focused on who I really am, and that one who is the source, and I can make the connection, it's like a moth going towards a flame, right? I'm the moth, God is the flame. And of course, flames attract moths. If the flame is bright enough, the moth won't be conscious of anything else at all. And the great thing is that we plunge into the flame, as the song says, but nothing gets burnt except what's useless. I think I just I just lose what maculates me. I become immaculate. I become clean. I become pure in that connection. And of course, it's so fulfilling that you don't need anything else. You feel that you've received something. You feel, and in that song, I talk about giving us back our crowns again. It means giving us back our sense of self-sovereignty, that I can be a ruler of myself. And even though we're wallowing in whatever low feelings we have about ourselves, and you just work it out. If you have a higher level of engagement with people and things and with your sense organs, you'll definitely have higher level of self-respect. And if we come down in our engagement with people and things, our respect also comes down. Mm-hmm. So that's why I said that we're he come into our darkest night, found us broken and full of shame. That's more or less how the feeling was. So I know, but why should I be full of shame? Why should I be ashamed of myself? It's just because I've lost my self-sovereignty. I've lost what makes me worthy as a human being. And people will seek peace. People, instead of becoming pure, they adore purity. They worship purity, like the virgins and the deities and so on, Virgin Mary and so on. They worship purity. They put it outside themselves, and they put the priestly castes at a higher level. But in fact, why can't I be pure also? So all of that, it's all about the recovering. That song is about the recovering of our self-respect.
Very beautiful. I think about the words very often. I've got a little question on the back of that, but let me just say, if anyone is burning with a question, you have just got a few minutes to write your question in the chat box. In the chat box, and I'll put them to Ken before he leaves, which he has to in about 10 minutes time. The other thing we haven't talked about is, you very exquisitely described that experience very eloquently. And as I hear your words, it makes me think, well, why would anyone not want to have that experience if it was on offer? And that's one of the things I love about the Brahma Kumari's teaching is someone saying, you don't have to be in a physical relationship. You don't have to eat meat. You don't have to do what other people tell you to do. You can follow your own truth. You can live this different life, and sets that out as a possibility for you and presents that as a scenario which otherwise you would never have considered. But the final piece in the jigsaw, if you like, of purity in lifestyle is taking that experience that you've just described and waking early in the morning when the atmosphere is so pure, so that you can really immerse yourself in it and meditate in that beautiful early morning vibration, and that is what will inform and guide your whole day. Can you just say something about the importance of that in your lifestyle?
Yeah, the first thoughts of every day are the foundation of the day, I found. So if you train yourself to wake up before you jump into any activity, to have really powerful and pure thoughts about yourself and about others, about the world, about your relationship with God, that provides such a stable foundation for anything you're going to build on top of it during the day. If you don't have that foundation, you start to build something, it sort of falls down. And I know that people who are watching in, they know that, they get up sort of tired, exhausted. They've had a hard day and a hard night, maybe the day and the night before, and they sort of drag themselves out of bed. They sort of go to work, they go through the treadmill. And at the end of the day, they're expelled by it, and they're sort of into a state of collapse when they get home. I mean, is that life? Is it just sort of running from one day to the next, like a hamster in the wheel? I don't think so. I think if you start off, and again, we start off the day quite early, actually, while most people are sleeping. And why? Because that's the time of the day when the whole atmosphere of the world, or around you, at least in your country, in your city, will be the most peaceful and the most pure, because the majority of people are sleeping at 4 o'clock. So that's when we have our first meditation. And then, you know, that if we train ourselves, we can actually sleep less, because what makes us tired is not physical activity, but it's useless thinking. So I'm doing something to cut down my useless thinking. I will not get as tired as I normally would, and I can dedicate that time. You know, I made a calculation recently that in 46 years I'm practicing meditation, getting up early, and I like sleeping, say 5.5 hours a day. I've actually earned about 4 years that I wouldn't otherwise have. You know, I would have spent sleeping. So it's very, very beneficial if we can do that, because it just sets the tone for the day.
And do you think these things that we've been talking about, of a pure diet and, you know, purity in relationships in terms of celibacy, do you think those components enable that early morning meditation to happen because you're not using energy up in a useless way?
That's right, exactly. All of these things feed each other, like my attitude towards others, my attitude towards the body, my attitude towards matter in the form of food, my attitude towards time. All of these things actually feed each other, and I can make the most of their, they say, the symbiosis that happens between them.
Mm-hmm. And the final sort of discipline, if you like, is to be very careful what influences you expose yourself to in terms of images that come into your mind, things that you hear, things that you see on a screen, because that also interferes with your own energy field.
I remember when I first started, I had several friends who were not very elevated company. You know, they were the ones that we all go out and do the town sort of thing. And I thought, okay, I'm just gonna avoid all of these outings without being unfriendly, of course, but I'm just not gonna go out anymore like I used to. And I found that very useful, because I could develop a sort of a consolidated effort in that time, and then after that I didn't need it. So I kept myself loving and friendly, but I didn't need to go out anymore. Everyone thought I'd come crazy, but it's a good, I believe, is a good type of craziness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I mean, we've touched on so many points today, and I think one of the take-home messages is that this is a journey. It's not a one-stop shop in terms of a quick fix. It's something that becomes more subtle, more refined. You're forever finding the nuances within purity, within food and lifestyle. But we're going to close now. We haven't had any questions. I think everyone's just enjoyed what you've been saying, and I think you've explained everything so well. People are feeling, really on board with what you've been saying. But, before we let you get back to your retreat, it would be nice to just have a few moments of meditation together where you can perhaps tie together some of these threads and just leave us with a thought on purity.
Okay, so everyone sit nicely on your seat wherever you are. Don't need to close your eyes. Keep your sort of eyes unfocused. And remember who you are. I am the soul sitting in this physical body. I'm not the body. I have a body, but I'm the master of the body. So think about that. Just as you're seated on a seat, you're sitting there, just imagine a sort of a subtle seat behind the forehead, in the middle of the forehead, where your mind is sitting, where your consciousness is sitting. And just sit there with it and start to feel a sense of command. And this is where purity starts. by retaking your self-control. I am the soul. I have a body. I use it. It's my very valuable instrument, but it's just like a vehicle. And it should not dominate me. So, let alone my body, not even to be dominated by other people's bodies, however beautiful and splendid they are. So I am the soul. I'm not matter of any shape or form. I'm much more powerful than, you know, a pizza or some ice cream or chocolate. I'm the soul. Matter in any shape or form cannot fulfill me. People in any shape or form cannot fulfill me. I, without God, cannot fulfill myself. So how do I, then this is the whole thing. The search for fulfillment is what drives us. So if I can fulfill myself from the source, because He, God, the one we call Allah or Shiva or Jehovah or the Great Spirit, that one, the Divine One, He ultimately is the source of everything the soul needs. So if I can connect up, that love can come into me. And such a love that will overflow, and I would not need it from outside. Such peace that would overflow that I would not need it from going here or there. And such contentment that, you know, the content of the soul is okay. So I can just enjoy being filled with the spiritual qualities of the Supreme. And looking at the world in that state, I just have a feeling of compassion, actually. I'm not attracted, I'm just feeling compassion.
Beautiful. That was a near perfect resume of our entire conversation. Very impressive, Ken. Thank you so much. You've really, I'm sure, given anyone watching this the inspiration, if they did indeed need any, to really try out some of these concepts, because you've really sold it to us so beautifully that what you stand to gain is so enormous that it's worth going on this journey of reaching and aspiring towards purity in our lives. So with a big heart, I say thank you, and go well with the rest of your retreat programs in Sydney, and we'll get together again one other time, I'm sure.
Sure.
And it would be
Thank
super.
you very much.
You're such a joy to listen to. So I hope we get to talk to you again.
Thanks.
But
Thank
for
you
now,
so much. Thanks.
I'll hand back to Lena and Ranjan.
You also did everything very brilliantly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, Sister Philippa, for bringing such beautiful questions. And then Brother Ken, thank you for sharing all this interesting, informative, real, beautiful sharing. And you explain in such a nice way, in essence, but in very detailed way, that whoever would hear this in the future, because we're going to put this on YouTube, and I'm sure that many will take benefit of this sharing. And we really thank you very much, both of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ranjan.
Thanks, Ranjan.